I love Alabama. Like, it's crazy. And other people I know have a very mixed relationship with it, but I really don't. I chose to stay in Alabama. And I'm not saying that I'm going to be here for the rest of my life or whatever, who knows. But I will say that I'm proud to be from Alabama. So there's something at the core of the idea of Alabama that's very important to my work. And I think it has to do with the found object thing and the created object thing. And Alabama is amazingly beautiful. And I find things in Alabama, people, places, objects, things that just constantly inspire me. And I couldn't make this work in another place. I am utterly convinced of that. It's kind of like, I always talk about creative placemaking. And so like, I'm very oriented towards creative placemaking and how it works in a community, but also just in my studio, creative placemaking is incredibly important because I want people to know that all of the objects in my work that I make, all the paper, all the dyeing, all the clay and stuff, it's from Alabama. So like, it wouldn't be the same if I lived somewhere else. I think a lot of artists talk about like being in the moment, and like, I'm very tied into the craft of making. Like, I don't silo the difference between fine art and craft, because my work bridges both of those. But I will say I'm so into mindfulness that of course everything I do is related. Every time I collage a fragment together, I think of it as like chanting. And it has as much to do with like that type of prayer as with ideas of time. So I tend to have a very complicated relationship with my work, and I know that makes the work more difficult to interpret, but I think all the best things in life are actually a result of us trying to have complicated questions and complicated conversations about things. And I certainly hope in Alabama that we continue to have complicated conversations about things that can uplift us. But also I will just say, like, my work is as much about rising into the air in glory as it is being smashed down to the earth. And so when I address gender studies or race in my work, I want to have a complicated relationship with it, because I think that's important and there are things we need to talk about. Gosh, I hope they take so many questions away from this show, because I do know that some people find my work very mysterious or sometimes difficult to fathom. But I also hope that they take this opportunity to dwell and actually look at the objects for an elongated kind of amount of time, because it's one of the important things about how I think about the viewer interaction with my work is that it's not just about a moment, it's about duration. And when you're thinking about a person, you can't just think about their name and you can't just think about facts. It's a whole suspended belief system. And that's what I've tried to do with the portraits, is create these installations that somehow encompass something huge about the person. All the artists have really inspired me. But as to how I know them, like, some of them were just bizarre, interactions where I didn't realize I was going to meet them. And one of the things I always tell my students is that a lot of times culturally, institutionally, a lot of times artists think of success as a very narrow thing, like I'm really lucky to be collected by museums and have people collect my work. But the real success to me is meeting someone like Pinky Bass or Brian or Marilee or Uku or any of them, and just having this collaborative community and having people to share my work and ideas with. And it's all because of Alabama. We all met and intersected in Alabama. I think of all these people as very powerful people in their own ways, even though typically I don't think they would be called that. And some of the people are very difficult people, and some of them are really easy to get along with. But I admire both sides of that story. And so like that was definitely a thing where certain people I was trying to think about, like, wow, they're so easygoing. What is the texture, or what is the overall kind of tonality of the piece that I can have a very fluid, like easygoing thing. And since I'm not an easygoing person, like when I was tackling my self-portrait, I really did think of this alchemical idea of what vitriol is and what that means in transformation and transmogrification. And I was really thinking, like, when I dye the paper, like, how can I have it be a little bit caustic and a little bit vitriol? And so in the portraits, there are 11 portraits of artists and 1 self-portrait. And then it's hard for me to talk about some of the portraits because it's been a weird relationship where a lot of times in my work I have an idea and I never try to think about what the finished piece is going to be. I let my studio practice define the pieces. So like I'm very present and I really believe about being in the moment when you're working so that you can have the capacity to change and make things more complicated. But with these portraits, there's actually 3 or 4 of the portraits that were incredibly difficult to make because the deeper I would go, the more confused I got. And so I really had to pull back and apply a reckoning. And that's how I came up with the title of the show, because I wanted to have some type of structure for myself and for the audience that would come through on the portraits.